Good morning, class. Welcome to day 2 of our online learning for this week, as I am in Camp Forest Springs and am not able to be there in person. Hope you're doing well. And again, I'm assuming that at the time you're watching this video, you've already taken attendance and you've already had about 5 minutes to catch up with each other, throwing the ball around as we like to do in room 208. So, we turn back to our text with Ray Bradbury, but before we dive into the story again, I want to talk about point of view, which is the second in your packet over here. So we have 4 boxes that we need to fill out, 4 quadrants, and I am happy to help you through that, but we need to commit these to memory eventually so that you know what you're talking about in all of those different points of view. So, first person, you're probably familiar with. You've read lots of stuff in first person before, and that simply means that the story is being told from the viewpoint of one of the characters using the pronouns I or we. So if you ever find someone saying, I did this, then I picked up the bucket and I took it up the hill, that is all from the first person point of view. That is the perspective. Now, all the rest on this sheet are in third person. There is a second person, and I'll get to that at the end. It's not that exciting or really cool. We just don't use it hardly ever, so I'm skipping it for now. The first of the third persons, that's hard to say, the first of the third persons is called the third person limited. That happens to be the point of view from which this story is told that we're reading, and it's very useful and common in literature. What that means is that the narrator is an outside observer, so you still have a narrator, that focuses on the thoughts and feelings of only one character. So they are limited to that person's feelings, to that person's experience, even though they aren't that person. It's still third person, but it's different than but it's not everyone. Next we have third person omniscient. You've probably heard this word omniscient before in Bible class when you're describing who God is, which means all-knowing. And when it's a narrator, that just means that the narrator, the point of view from which the story is told, that person knows how everybody feels, how everybody acts. They're not limited to one person. They know everything, and so they can comment on that in the story. Finally, there is one that we've haven't talked much about, third person objective. If someone says, just give me an objective summary of what happened. If someone's trying to get to the bottom of a crime, they're saying, keep the emotions out of it, keep how you feel about it away from this summary. I just want to know the facts. Just give me the facts. So, in third person objective, my definition for you, the narrator reports the facts of a narrator as a seemingly neutral and impersonal outside observer. An outside observer without access to the character's emotions or feelings. So if I just said, at 11:35 p.m., he left the house and he went over to the store from which the gem was stolen, which sounds like a really traditional mystery story. But I would just give you the times that it happened, what I saw, what it appeared like, and nothing more, like how I felt. That is something you would rarely see in literature, but you would see in lots of report writing on different situations. So, I will provide those definitions to the substitute teacher so that she or he can fill you in and remind you of exactly what those are, so that you don't have to write this down as the video is going, but that they'll be able to provide for you the exact definition and repeat it for you if you need to hear it again. Okay. With that in mind, I think we're ready to get back to our story. Remember, we are on Mars, and the setting is becoming the conflict as well. How there is a human versus nature conflict in this story, and it's escalated now that the passage back to Earth has been shattered. due to atomic wars. And that means that our protagonist, Mr. Bittering, is trying to find himself, is trying to survive and almost make himself at home on Mars, but he's not wanting to become a Martian. He's not trying to become a permanent resident. He's trying to survive until the passage to Earth becomes available to him. And that's his conflict, because at the moment, he's realizing that the food that he's ingesting is starting to change. It's starting to mutate just a little bit. And he's freaked out by that, because he says, "You are what you eat. And if I eat this Martian food, really just earthly food, but grown in Martian soil, then I'm going to start to become a Martian myself." And he doesn't want to do that, yet he wants to survive, so maybe he's willing. We'll have to see. What is his plan going to be? What would you do? Make a prediction for how you think that he ought to respond in this situation. Do you think he just needs to make himself home and settle down forever and start to adapt the Martian lifestyle? Or do you think that you would, or he should, think of another plan to avoid this sort of assimilation? From the character as we know him, we know that he's probably going to come up with another plan because of the way that his mind thinks about these things. Let's pick it up on page 214 where we left off. He just stormed off into town, one of the settlements of the Earth people that are living on Mars. In town, on the shadowy step of the grocery store, the men sat with their hands on their knees, conversing with great leisure and ease. Mr. Bittering wanted to fire a pistol in the air. He doesn't like their attitude. They're too calm. "What are you doing, you fools?" he thought, "sitting here. You've heard the news. We're stranded on this planet. Well, move. Aren't you frightened? Aren't you afraid? What are you going to do?" "Hello, Harry," said everyone. "Look," he said to them, "you did hear the news the other day, didn't you?" They nodded and laughed. Sure, Harry." "What are you going to do about it?" "Do, Harry, do? What can we do?" "Build a rocket. That's what." "A rocket, Harry? To go back to all that trouble? Oh, Harry." "But you must want to go back. Have you noticed the peach blossoms, the onions, the grass?" "Why, yes, Harry, seems we did," said one of the men. "Doesn't it scare you?" Can't recall that it did much, Harry." "Idiots!" "Now, Harry." Bittering wanted to cry. "You've got to work with me. If we stay here, we'll all change. The air, don't you smell it? Something in the air. A Martian virus, maybe. Some seed or a pollen. Listen to me." Let's pause. You have a question in your packet that I want you to discuss as a class. So please pause this video, and answer the question together. Do you think the other men are wrong to ignore Harry's fears? Why or why not? Okay. Now that you've had that discussion, let's dive in and see what happens next. They stared at him. "Sam," he said to one of them. "Yes, Harry? Will you help me build a rocket?" "Harry, I got a whole load of metal and some blueprints. You want to work in my metal shop on a rocket? You're welcome. I'll sell you that metal for $500. You should be able to construct a right pretty rocket if you work alone in about 30 years. Everyone laughed. "Don't laugh." Sam looked at him with quiet good humor. "Sam," Bittering said, "your eyes." "What about them, Harry? Didn't they used to be gray?" "Well, now I don't remember." "They were, weren't they?" "Why do you ask, Harry?" "Because now they're kind of yellow-colored." "Is that so, Harry?" Sam said casually. "And you're taller, and thinner. You might be right, Harry. Sam, you shouldn't have yellow eyes. Harry, what color eyes have you got? Sam said. My eyes? They're blue, of course. Here you are, Harry. Sam handed him a pocket mirror. Take a good look at yourself. Mr. Bittering hesitated and then raised the mirror to his face. There were little, very dim flecks of new gold captured in the blue of his eyes. Now look at what you've done, said Sam a moment later. You've broken my mirror. All right, let's make inferences. Why is the mirror suddenly broken? Probably because Harry Bittering looked at himself in the face through this mirror, saw that his eyes were no longer blue, and that he was changing into something that he was not before. This is on a physical level now, but again, we want to follow Bradbury's ideas about maybe how he's becoming more than physical, how he's actually becoming like a Martian in how he thinks and how he sees the world, how he sees himself. So this is something he's going to protest heavily against, our character, Mr. Bittering, and he's going to freak out and perhaps look for a way to change back into who he was before. Okay. Harry Bittering moved into the metal shop and began to build the rocket. Men stood in the open door and talked and joked without raising their voices. Once in a while they gave him a hand on lifting something, but mostly they just idled and watched him with their yellowing eyes. It's supper time, Harry, they said. His wife appeared with his supper in a wicker basket. I won't touch it, he said. I'll eat only food from our deep freeze, food that came from Earth, nothing from our garden. His wife stood watching him. You can't build a rocket? I worked in a shop once, when I was 20. I know metal. Once I get it started, the others will help, he said, not looking at her, laying out the blueprints. Harry, Harry, she said helplessly. We've got to get away, Cora. We've got to. Let's pause. So the plan B that Harry is coming up with is to build a rocket that will take him back to Earth, the place that has just been basically destroyed through atomic warfare. What do you think of this plan? This is quite a plan that is difficult to imagine would be feasible for him, given that he is not really a metalsmith. He once worked with metal when he was 20, but now he's trying to build a rocket from scratch in order to get himself back 60 million miles. That seems a little ridiculous, and the people around town are going to make it seem ridiculous as well. There are some sort of parallels that we can see, though, even in our reading of the scriptures. Maybe it's already popping to mind the story of Noah's Ark. What is Noah commanded to do? Well, he's commanded to build this ark because the Lord is going to judge the world through a flood, and he needs to be prepared to be the remnant, be the remaining person to carry on the human story. And it seems that there is an intentional parallel here, seeing how everybody else in the village is looking on into his workshop with contempt, meaning looking down on him and thinking he's crazy, when in reality, he might be the one that's still sane and they're all crazy. But that's really dependent on how you interpret the story. Do you think it's right and important for him to get back to Earth at all costs in order to preserve something of their traditional way of life? Or do you think it would be wiser for him to say, look, you made it on Mars. We have systems for surviving on Mars, so why don't you just do as the Martians do as the Romans do, is the old saying, and just get along with what life you have left. That's up to you to decide and to comment on and evaluate as we go forward. We are going to continue now in the next paragraph. The nights were full of wind that blew down the empty moonlit sea meadows past the little white chess cities, lying for their 12,000th year in the shallows. In the earthman's settlement, the Bittering house shook with a feeling of change. Lying abed, Mr. Bittering felt his bones shifted, shaped, melted like gold. His wife, lying beside him, was dark from many sunny afternoons. Dark she was and golden-eyed, burnt almost black by the sun, sleeping, and the children metallic in their beds, and the wind roaring, forlorn, and changing through the old peach trees, the violet grass shaking out green rose petals. The fear would not be stopped. It had his throat and heart. It dripped in a wetness of the arm and the temple and the trembling palm. A green star rose in the east. A strange word emerged from Mr. Bittering's lips. Eort, Eort, he repeated it. It was a Martian word. He knew no Martian. In the middle of the night, he arose and dialed a call through to Simpson, the archaeologist. Simpson, what does the word Eort mean? Why, that's the old Martian word for our planet Earth. Why? No special reason. All right, let's pause. This is an interesting, strange passage here. We have the first Martian word in the text that is uttered uncontrollably almost. It's just in his mind, and then suddenly he feels like saying it. Uttered almost uncontrollably through our character, Mr. Bittering, who is the last person we would expect to be speaking Martian, but nonetheless does begin to speak Martian inevitably. What does that mean? Why is he doing that? What does that say about how our environments shape us? Is it just because he's hearing other people? Is it because there's something about him that has become Martian and now he can't help but speak Martian? Let's keep figuring that out as we read on. Also, something I forgot to mention before is that pay attention to the diet. Remember, he's so paranoid that everything he eats will turn him into a Martian, so he's only eating things out of the deep freeze, meaning the food that has been preserved from Earth back when they left Earth. But that might not last forever, of course, because he's not growing new food. If he wants to survive eventually, he will have to change his supplies from the deep freeze into the garden foods. The garden on Martian soil, which could change lots of things. Okay, let's continue on with the next paragraph. No special reason. The telephone slipped from his hand. Hello? 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 It kept saying while he sat gazing out at the green star. Bittering? Harry, are you there? The days were full of metal sound. He laid the frame of the rocket with the reluctant help of 3 indifferent men. He grew very tired in an hour or so, and had to sit down. The altitude, laughed a man. Are you eating, Harry? Asked another. I'm eating, he said angrily. From your deep freeze? Yes. You're getting thinner, Harry. I am not. And taller. Liar! His wife took him aside a few days later. Harry, I've used up all the food in the deep freeze. There's nothing left. I'll have to make sandwiches using food grown on Mars. He sat down heavily. You must eat, she said. You're weak. Yes, he said. He took a sandwich, opened it, looked at it, and began to nibble at it. Okay, let's pause. What do you think will happen to Harry now that the Earth food is gone and he's nibbling a Martian sandwich? You'll have to talk about that in groups, or just with the people around you is fine. And then as a class, please discuss that question, and then resume the video after you've finished discussing this question. Here we go, continuing the story now. And take the rest of the day off, she said. It's hot. The children want to swim in the canals and hike. Please come along. I can't waste time. This is a crisis. Just for an hour, she urged. A swim will do you good. He rose, sweating. All right, all right. Leave me alone. I'll come. Turn the page, please. Good for you, Harry. The sun was hot, the day quiet. There was only an immense staring burn upon the land. They moved along the canal, the father, the mother, the racing children in their swimsuits. They stopped and ate meat sandwiches. He saw their skin baking brown, and he saw the yellow eyes of his wife and his children, their eyes that were never yellow before. A few tremblings shook him, but were carried off in waves of pleasant heat as he lay in the sun. He was too tired to be afraid. It's an interesting line there, too tired to be afraid. The sort of paranoia that really drove him in all of his pursuits before, the pursuit to build the rocket, the pursuit to not eat certain foods that were grown on Martian soil, now seemed to be replaced with a weariness. He can't lead this life of defiance forever. That seems to be the message here. Cora, how long have your eyes been yellow? She was bewildered. Always, I guess. They didn't change from brown in the last 3 months? She bit her lips. No, why do you ask? Never mind. They sat there. The children's eyes, he said, they're yellow too. Sometimes growing children's eyes change colors. Maybe we're children too. At least to Mars. That's a thought, he laughed. Think I'll swim. They leaped into the canal water, and he let himself sink down and down to the bottom like a golden statue and lie there in green silence. All was water quiet and deep. All was peace. He felt the steady, slow current drift him easily. If I lie here long enough, he thought, the water will work and eat away my flesh until the bones show like coral. Just my skeleton left. And then the water can build on that skeleton green things, deep water things, red things, yellow things, change. Change, slow, deep, silent change. And isn't that what it is up there? He saw the sky submerged above him, the sun made Martian by atmosphere and time and space. Up there, a big river, he thought, a Martian river, all of us lying deep in it, in our pebble houses, in our sunken boulder houses, like crayfish, hidden, and the water washing away our old bodies and lengthening the bones, and he let himself drift up through the soft light. Dan sat on the edge of the canal, regarding his father seriously. Uta, he said. What? Asked his father. The boy smiled. You know, Utas, the Martian word for father. Where did you learn it? I don't know. Around. Uta! What do you want? The boy hesitated. I want to change my name. Change it? Yes. His mother swam over. What's wrong with Dan for a name? Dan fidgeted. The other day you called Dan. I didn't even hear. I said to myself, that's not my name. I have a new name I want to use. Mr. Bittering held to the side of the canal, his body cold and his heart pounding slowly. What is this new name? Linnell. Isn't that a good name? Can I use it? Can't I, please? Mr. Bittering put his hand to his head. He thought of the silly rocket, himself working alone, himself alone even among his family. So alone. He heard his wife say, Why not? He heard himself say, Yes, you can use it. Yeah, screamed the boy. I'm Linnell! Linnell! Racing down the meadowlands, he danced and shouted. Mr. Bittering looked at his wife. Why did we do that? I don't know, she said. It just seemed like a good idea. So in this latest section, you see a change in his character, right? You're asked the question, why do you think Harry and Cora seem so unconcerned with Dan's surprising request to change his name? That seems like a pretty big deal. But the Mr. Bittering of this page is a little bit different than the character that was there a few pages ago. He's not as panicky. He's not freaking out. He's sort of accepting some things, right? When he's sitting in the river, is it a lake or a river? When he's in the water and he's just underwater, sort of thinking to himself, meditating, he starts to see how everything changes and how after a while it doesn't even feel like it's changing because it's going so gradually, so slowly, and that's all that he's known. That becomes all that he's known. It feels like it's always been that way. Just a little story that connects to this. There's a little experiment with a frog. If you dip a frog into a boiling pot of water, the frog will find a way to jump out of that boiling pot. But if you put a frog in the water, and then when it's just lukewarm, medium temperature water, and then you slowly dial it up until it is boiling, then the frog will just sit there and cook itself away. That seems to be part of what's going on with Mr. Bittering and his family, and why he's so willing to accept the name change, because he doesn't much see an alternative, that there's just changing into this sort of climate and there's no going back. So with that, we're going to continue on to the next section. They walked into the hills. They strolled on old mosaic paths beside still pumping fountains. The paths were covered with a thin film of cool water all summer long. You kept your bare feet cool all day, splashing as in a creek, wading. They came to a small deserted Martian villa with a good view of the valley. It was on top of a hill. Blue marble halls, large murals, a swimming pool. It was refreshing in this hot summertime. The Martians hadn't believed in large cities. "How nice," said Mrs. Bittering. "If we could move up here to this villa for the summer." "Come on," he said. "We're going back to town. There's work to be done on the rocket." But as he worked that night, the thought of the cool blue marble villa entered his mind. As the hours passed, the rocket seemed less important. In the flow of the days and weeks, the rocket receded and dwindled. The old fever was gone. It frightened him to think he had let it slip this way. But somehow, the heat, the air, the working conditions, he heard the men murmuring on the porch of his metal shop. "Everyone's going. You heard? All going. That's right." Bittering came out. "Going where?" He saw a couple of trucks loaded with children and furniture drive down the dusty street. "Up to the villas," said the man. "Yeah, Harry, I'm going. So is Sam." "Aren't you?" "That's right, Harry. What about you?" "I've got work to do here." "Work? You can finish that rocket in the autumn when it's cooler." He took a breath. "I got the frame all set up. In the autumn is better." Their voices were lazy in the heat. "Got to work," he said. "Autumn," they reasoned, and they sounded so sensible, so right. Alright, seeing that this video is at about 30 minutes, I'm going to stop here and we'll finish the rest tomorrow. And even if you don't make it through the entirety of this video through one day's class, because of discussion questions and all of that, which I hope are happening, that's okay. And we will just make up for whatever doesn't get covered in class when I get back. Alright, that's all for now. Have a great day. I'll see you later.